Saltpan was a city-state in Europa that answered to the Scythian sovereign. In exchange for annual tribute, the city would be allowed to be independent and to enjoy a profitable form of trade in both salt and ice. Despite centuries of prosperity, the city emptied out one winter, with no warning and no survivors. When the Scythian sovereign received no news and no tributes, they sent a squadron of 40 Scythian soldiers to scrutinize the Saltpan city-state. Of the 40 soldiers sent to Saltpan, only 17 survived. While what transpired in Saltpan before the Scythians visited is unknown, what is known is what the Scythians saw. Some inferences can be made from what was discovered. However, with the destruction of Saltpan, what did happen to the 15,000 souls to the city? What is known for sure is what destroyed the city was destroyed by the Scythians. Springtime, 1700 AUC. We knew something was wrong long before we made it to the city proper. The border post we approached was an empty shack. No guard was inside, nor any note saying where they went. I had been to Saltpan a few times. There were always at least 3 guards in the guard post. They were barely more than toll collectors, but still proof of the princess's royal power. The guards collected tolls, the serfs farmed, the roads were kept clear, and Saltpan could keep on pretending to be a major city like Ream, Asil, or Starfall. However, they missed the tribute that was supposed to be made in the autumn, right after harvest time. Winter came and went with no tribute, so our sovereign ordered us to investigate and collect tribute from Saltpan. As we passed through the land surrounding Saltpan, we only saw more evidence that something was terribly wrong. The farms we passed had rotting crops in the fields. The fields weren't harvested, and the wheat was left to rot on the stalk. The vineyards were overgrown with grapes rotting on the ground below and on the vine. The orchards were a bit better, but there was still far too much fallen fruit, and the branches were infested with birds that ate the overripe fruits, and the farms were empty of people. We went into a few farms. There were no people. We feared plague at first, except we found no graves, no bodies, no bones of those who would have died. Plague was something that was feared for good reason, but whatever swept through the countryside was definitely not suffering plague, nor famine. We found the grain stores. They were as rotten and rat-infested as the fields, but they weren't touched by humans. So whatever happened during the summer. If it happened during last spring, then nothing would have had time to be planted. If it happened during the winter or fall, then the stores would have been empty and no planting would have been done. Though curiously, it did not explain what did happen. It wasn't bandits, raiders, nor marauders. Plenty of valuables were left behind. The only thing gone was the people. Maybe we'd find answers in the city. We have been traveling for 3 days. We dare not camp inside any of the homes. It feels cursed and we dare not risk it. We can see the walls of Saltpan and we can see the surrounding sea that gives the city its name. Saltpan is built on the high point of an isthmus. During low tide, it can easily access the land, and so much salt is left behind that gives the city salt. When we arrived, it was still high tide, so Saltpan was still an island. From where we stood, we could see no lights within the city. No people moving. Whatever was affecting the countryside was also affecting the city. We had loaded some of the valuables and what little salt could be found in the countryside. However, it isn't going to be enough for the Scythian sovereign. When we head into the city tomorrow, we have to get enough tribute for the sovereign. However, they will not be happy to learn that they just lost a major source of tribute. If we find survivors, we can ask them what took everyone and what killed all of the animals. We passed by the farms, and what took us longer for us to realize was the fact that the farms had no livestock. They had rats, they had wild birds, wild cats, even wild dogs, and a few aurochs wandering around the farms. However, there were no livestock, and nor were there any bodies of the livestock either. Wherever the people went, they took their animals and left behind their grain and their gold. When the tide was low, we made it to the city gates. They were sealed shut. However, unusually, they were braced on the outside and not from the inside. Gates are designed to be sealed on the inside, not the outside. There were piled crates on the outside, all full of salt and gold. It was heavy, but it seems that the people of Saltpan used the sovereign's tribute to lock themselves into the city. Though it does raise the question, why did they lock themselves in the city? And what happened to those that were on the outside? We did get an answer to that last question when we found our first bodies. When we moved the crates and loaded them onto our wagons, one of the soldiers left to take a leak. He didn't make it 30 meters before he found the bodies hanging from the city walls. They were very old, more blue and purple than anything else. The winter preserved the bodies, and the springtime just now thawed them out again. Behind them on the wall was a long message inscribed in Osatian. An interpreter read it for us, and I had it transcribed below, though I don't know what to make of the message. We couldn't burn them all. They came from the country. They consumed the city. We trapped them inside. This is not a place of honor. There is nothing of value here. There is a danger inside this place. The danger is to the body. We considered ourselves a powerful people. We could not stop it. The danger will spread among those who touch it. The danger is greatest at the center. The danger will be unleashed if this place is disturbed. It is best forgotten and shunned. The danger is still here. The lines were not familiar, but the way it was written, it was like it was from an old poem or a folk tale. Not like anything I've heard before, but the tone in the word choice definitely felt like it was made to last for a long time. Whatever happened here, they considered it dangerous enough to seal the city, carve a warning into the wall, and then kill themselves. Not merely themselves, but their children as well. Some of the bodies that were hung were small enough to be children, and the skulls on the rocks below were small enough to be infants. We collected plenty of salt and gold from the crates outside, though it came down to whether or not it was worth exploring the city proper to see what was inside Saltpan that drove the city to death. We moved the last of the crates, and we removed the ropes and pegs that were driven into the wooden gates to keep it closed. They never intended Saltpan to be entered. I asked 20 men to wait outside the gates to make sure no one and nothing else got out. I would go in with 19 other men, and we would make it to the princess's palace in the center of Saltpan, and we would learn why Saltpan is not a place of honor. The first thing we noticed was the smell of the city. Cities smell. That is simply a fact of life. So many people in such a small space leads to terrible smells. The smell of grease, fire, trash, shit, piss, miasma, life and death filled the cities. You adjust to the smell when you live in a city. However, the smell is always there. After the last few weeks in the countryside, we forgot what a city smelled like. And even now, Saltpan only smells like the countryside. The streets are empty, and so are the shops and homes. Like most civilized places, the shops are on the first floor and the homes are built just above them on the second floor. Just like the countryside, we find no one. There's plenty of weeds growing from the packed dirt streets and even in the homes. But there's no people. There's no animals, not even wild rats. The pantries are just as rotten as the granaries in the countryside, except there's no rats in the pantries. Something is deeply wrong in the city. As we wandered through, we got a sense that we were being watched. Even though there was no one around, we all felt like we were being followed. We kept our weapons at the ready as we got closer to the palace. The closer we get, the worse we feel. Something in the air chills us to the bones. It is like something inside our bodies were screaming while we wandered through the silent city. The palace is in the center of the city, and it is barely a palace. Starfall has a real palace, soaring columns, beautiful murals, golden leaf, and the palace was a sign of the sovereign's power. Banners of conquered cities and tribes hang from the walls, showing who the sovereign presides over. Palace in Saltpan is barely larger than a normal building. It did have a painted mural of a sunrise on it, and there were more carved words on the walls. If you can see these words, run. We turned to each other, and we came this far with no answers, so we entered the palace together. Unlike the rest of the city, there is evidence that there were people here. We can see there were deep cuts into the stone of the palace floor. They've been gouged out as they were dragged into the palace's treasure room. There are more gouges in the stone leading up to the vault doors. The doors were sealed and kept closed with heavy iron chains. There was only a single word carved into the stone in the front of the doors. Danger. The feeling of being watched is the heaviest here. Staring at that iron door, we turned to each other, and we all silently agreed. We would leave the city. There was plenty of tribute, and this was too haunting. As we left the palace, the feeling of being watched lessened some. But we did not make it far from the palace before we found something strange. It was an accident at first. One of the soldiers tripped over a strange ingot. It was yellow and it was softer than lead. The ingot was not there earlier, but the soldiers got curious and tested their blades on it. The blades were covered in the strange soft metal, and we continued to the edge of the city, where we found more and more of the strange metal. Except it was not just in ingots, but it was shaped into things like blades, necklaces, rings, and jewelry. They weren't there earlier. I ignored the strange jewelry, but the rest of the soldiers seemed practically mesmerized by it, putting it on themselves and dropping their own weapons. I tried to get their attention, but they wouldn't listen to me, even when I tried smacking them. They only piled more of the strange metal on their bodies. even scraping it off the ingots and rubbing it across their faces and arms like it was cosmetic. Wherever the metal touched flesh, the flesh bubbled and melted off the bone, like the metal was molten and our flesh was merely butter. It even smelled like melting butter and cooking pork, as I watched in horror as the flesh burned, revealing the muscle and wet bone underneath. Even as the flesh and muscle burned away, the bone remained, and it kept moving. Even as my men's eyes melted like candles and their flesh boiled away on the packed dirt, they kept moving. Their bones made a slick, wet noise as they kept moving, and they gurgled as they put the cursed metal on their skin. I was frozen in horror as they swallowed the metal curlings and they dissolved out of their throats and dropped down on the ground, covered in boiling, hissing blood only to be picked up and consumed again. It was like swallowing molten gold, except the metal was solid, and the gurgles from what was left of the bodies moaned in pleasure. They were poisoning themselves, and they were ecstatic about it. I turned to run from them, and I saw what was stalking us through the streets of Saltpan. They were nearly perfectly blended with the brick, stone, and wood of the buildings, so you couldn't see them while they stood still. Their bones were coated in the strange yellow metal, and it was the same shade as the brick and dirt. But when they moved, you could see that they were there. Fully skeletal with no flesh left. They stalked silently and they were completely coated in the metal so no bone was left exposed, but they still walked and they still stalked. I tried to run, only to keep running into more and more of the skeletal stalkers. They stalked silently and slowly, but they were relentless and they were endless. I drew my sword, and even as I swung it at them, I barely scratched the metal off their bones. And even when I knocked them down, my sword was dinged, and even as they were knocked down, the skeletal stalkers still followed me. No matter how many I knocked down, no matter where I ran, no matter what damage I did to them, they were not afraid, and they kept chasing me. They felt no fear. They did not grow tired. No matter what I did, I could not scare them away. Only when I made it to a quiet corner of the city did I think of something new to try. Based on the warning of the wall, fire must be what stopped this threat. I started a fire in the wooden structure, and I carried a torch across the city, which caused the stalkers to part away from me, fearing to get close to the flames. I started fires across the city as I made my way to the gate. The further I made it from the palace, the less stalkers there were, until I made it only a few blocks from the gate as they set fires in the city, leaving the stalkers behind before I made it through the gate. When there, I shared my story with the remaining soldiers. They didn't believe me, but they understood that I ordered them to burn Saltpan. The next day we traveled through the city, carrying torches and setting fire to everything that would burn. As we gathered up the metal, we dumped it into the fires, which attracted the silent skeletal stalkers into the flames. Whatever curse animated their bones forced them to follow the metal as much as they could. In the flames, the metal melted and boiled away, leaving metallic smoke which seemed harmless. The fires melted the metal from the bones of the stalkers, leaving them still and embraced in death. We destroyed every building we could and burned all the metal we could find, leaving only the palace itself standing. No matter what we tried, we could not break open the vault to burn the danger inside the vault. So we left it behind and watched as the structures collapsed. Even the stone and brick buildings had wooden support structures and collapsed in the inferno. Fires ravaged cities in the best of times. Our flames were meant to burn everything, and burn everything it did. 4 more of my men died trying to spread the flames, and now we take the tribute we've collected to the sovereign. I hope to convince them that Salt Pan is better left shunned and forgotten. The captain would have their wishes honored. Salt Pan was left to rot and be buried under the sand of time. Even the location of Salt Pan is still unknown to this day. Considering the fact that we've not heard about these stalkers before or since the Salt Pan incident over 1,000 years ago, that means either another incident has never happened, or when it has happened, it left no one behind to explain what happened. I know it may seem like the stalkers were an easy threat. After all, how hard is it to get fire to burn a skeleton and to burn the yellow metal? I think that is the wrong question to consider. Consider the fact that whenever was in the princess's treasure room, wiped out an entire city. And even with the captain burning the rest of the city, they couldn't even get close to whatever the danger is. We have almost no information about the stalkers since this is our only source on them. Also consider the fact about half of the captain's men just saw the metal and they started eating it and rubbing it across their skin for apparently no reason. There's many dangerous things in the world, but most dangerous things don't compel harm just by being seen. This story is an important reminder to me that there are things out there so dangerous that we never hear about it because there were no survivors. So be careful out there and avoid anywhere that's marked as not being a place of honor.